Picture this: you're sitting in a meeting, listening to a colleague confidently explain a complex financial strategy they clearly don't understand. Meanwhile, the actual expert in the room stays quiet, occasionally wincing at the misinformation being shared with such conviction. Sound familiar? Welcome to one of psychology's most fascinating and troubling discoveries. This scenario plays out millions of times every day, across offices, social media platforms, dinner tables, and anywhere humans gather to share opinions. It's not just annoying, it's a fundamental flaw in how our brains work, and understanding it might just change how you see yourself and the world around you. In 1999, two researchers stumbled upon something that would revolutionize our understanding of human self-perception. David Dunning and Justin Kruger weren't trying to solve the mystery of human arrogance. They were simply curious about how accurately people could judge their own performance. Their experiment was elegantly simple. They gathered volunteers and tested them on 3 different skills: humor, logical reasoning, and grammar. Nothing too complex, just basic abilities most people encounter regularly. After completing the tests, participants faced a crucial second task: estimate how well they performed compared to their peers. What happened next was so counterintuitive that it initially seemed like an error in their data analysis. The participants who bombed the tests, those who scored in the bottom 25%, consistently believed they had performed far above average. We're not talking about slight overconfidence here. These individuals, who had just demonstrated significant incompetence, genuinely believed they had outperformed most of their peers. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The top performers, those who actually excelled at the tasks, systematically underestimated their abilities. They assumed everyone else was nearly as capable as they were, leading them to rank themselves lower than their actual performance warranted. This wasn't a fluke. The pattern repeated across different types of tests, different groups of people, and different contexts. Dunning and Kruger had uncovered what would become known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect, a cognitive bias so pervasive it touches nearly every aspect of human experience. At first glance, this discovery seems almost absurd. How can people be so spectacularly wrong about their own abilities? How can incompetence breed such confidence while expertise fosters doubt? The answer lies in a cruel irony of human cognition. When you lack knowledge or skill in a particular area, you also lack the very tools needed to recognize that deficiency. It's like trying to measure distance without a ruler, or attempting to tune an instrument when you're tone deaf. The skills required to perform well are often the same skills needed to evaluate performance accurately. Think about learning to drive. A complete beginner might feel confident after their first lesson because they successfully started the car and didn't crash. They don't yet understand the thousands of subtle decisions experienced drivers make automatically: checking mirrors, anticipating other drivers' behavior, adjusting for weather conditions. Their ignorance protects them from recognizing how much they don't know. Meanwhile, an experienced driving instructor is acutely aware of every potential hazard, every skill that needs development, every way things could go wrong. This knowledge breeds appropriate caution and humility. David Dunning captured this perfectly when he observed, if you're incompetent, you can't know you're incompetent. The skills you need to produce a right answer are exactly the skills you need to recognize what a right answer is. The other half of this effect is equally fascinating and perhaps more tragic. Highly competent individuals often fall victim to what we might call the curse of knowledge. Because they understand the true complexity of their field, they're painfully aware of how much they still don't know. These experts also make a critical error in judgment. They assume others possess similar knowledge and capabilities. A brilliant programmer might think their coding skills are average because they're constantly surrounded by other talented developers. A gifted teacher might doubt their abilities because they focus on the one student they couldn't reach rather than the 29 they inspired. This creates a perverse dynamic where the people most qualified to speak on a subject often remain silent, while those least qualified speak with the greatest confidence. You don't need to look far to see the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. Research shows that 93% of American drivers believe they're better than average, a mathematical impossibility that would be hilarious if it weren't so dangerous. In corporate environments, studies reveal that over 40% of employees believe they rank in the top 5% of performers at their company. Again, the math simply doesn't work, but the confidence is real. Social media has become perhaps the largest laboratory for observing this phenomenon. Scroll through any controversial topic, and you'll find countless individuals making confident pronouncements about subjects they've never formally studied, often contradicting actual experts who express their views with careful qualifications and appropriate uncertainty. To understand why this happens, we need to explore metacognition, essentially, thinking about thinking. This is your ability to step outside your own mental processes and evaluate them objectively. It's what allows you to recognize when you're confused, identify gaps in your knowledge, and catch your own errors. Metacognition is like having an internal quality control department for your thoughts. When this system works well, you can spot flawed reasoning, recognize the limits of your knowledge, and adjust your confidence accordingly. But here's the problem. Developing strong metacognitive abilities requires experience and knowledge in a particular domain. If you're incompetent in an area, you're likely to have poor metacognition in that same area. You can't spot errors you don't understand, and you can't recognize knowledge gaps you're unaware of. This creates a vicious cycle. Poor performers don't just lack skills, they lack the metacognitive awareness to recognize their poor performance. They sail through life blissfully, unaware of their deficiencies, making the same mistakes repeatedly without learning from them. While the Dunning-Kruger effect can be amusing when observed in others, its implications for society are genuinely alarming. In an age where everyone has a platform and an opinion, we're witnessing an unprecedented amplification of confident ignorance. The most unqualified voices on any topic are often the loudest and most certain. They aren't burdened by the complexity and nuance that experts understand. They can offer simple solutions to complex problems because they don't grasp why those problems are complex in the first place. Meanwhile, genuine experts often struggle to communicate effectively with general audiences. They're so aware of the intricacies and exceptions in their field that they find it difficult to make definitive statements. Their language is hedged with qualifications, their explanations are nuanced, and their certainty is appropriately limited. David Dunning noted that incompetence does not leave people disoriented, perplexed, or cautious. Instead, the incompetent are often blessed with an inappropriate confidence, buoyed by something that feels to them like knowledge. In our current information landscape, attention is currency, and confidence sells better than competence. The algorithm doesn't distinguish between accurate information and compelling content. A confident amateur with strong presentation skills often receives more engagement than a careful expert who acknowledges uncertainty. Mida. This creates perverse incentives. The people most qualified to inform public discourse, those who understand the complexity of issues and speak with appropriate nuance, are systematically disadvantaged in the competition for attention. We're left with a paradox. In an age when we have unprecedented access to expert knowledge, the voices we hear most often are frequently the least qualified to speak. Here's where things get even more interesting. Now that you know about the Dunning-Kruger effect, you might feel somewhat immune to it. After all, you're aware of the bias, you understand how it works, and you consider yourself a thoughtful, self-aware person. But this feeling of immunity is itself a manifestation of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You know just enough about the phenomenon to feel confident you can avoid it, while not knowing enough to realize how difficult that actually is. Dunning himself recognized this meta-level irony. The first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is that you don't know you're a member of the Dunning-Kruger Club. Thinking you're immune to cognitive biases is often evidence that you're falling victim to them. It's biases all the way down, and self-awareness only takes you so far. If we're honest with ourselves, most people are genuinely knowledgeable and experienced in only a handful of areas. Even brilliant individuals with diverse interests typically have deep expertise in just a few domains, yet we live in a culture that seems to expect everyone to have opinions about everything. Social media algorithms reward engagement, not accuracy. Hot takes get more shares than thoughtful analysis. The pressure to participate in every conversation, to have a stance on every issue, is enormous. But here's a liberating truth. You don't need to have an opinion about everything. In fact, the quantity of opinions someone holds is often inversely related to their quality and accuracy. The most intellectually honest position on most topics is some variation of "I don't know enough to have a strong opinion." This isn't intellectual cowardice, it's intellectual honesty. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't a fixed condition, it's a dynamic process that follows us throughout our learning journey. Every time you tackle a new skill, explore a new field, or face a new challenge, you're vulnerable to overconfidence in the early stages. This creates what researchers call the confidence curve. When you first encounter something new, you might feel overwhelmed and appropriately humble. But as you gain a little knowledge, confidence often spikes dramatically. This is peak Dunning-Kruger territory. As you continue learning, reality sets in. You begin to understand how much you don't know, and confidence drops accordingly. Only with extensive experience and genuine expertise does confidence stabilize at an appropriate level. This means that lifelong learners are constantly cycling through periods of overconfidence and self-doubt. It's not a bug in the system, it's a feature of how learning works. So how do we navigate this cognitive minefield? How do we maintain appropriate humility while still participating meaningfully in the world around us? First, embrace the power of I don't know. These three words might be the most intellectually honest phrase in any language. They signal curiosity rather than ignorance, wisdom rather than weakness. Second, actively seek out your blind spots. Ask trusted friends and colleagues for honest feedback about your capabilities. Look for areas where your confidence might exceed your competence. Third, become a student of complexity. The more you understand about any field, the more you'll appreciate how much there is to learn. This natural humility is one of the hallmarks of genuine expertise. Fourth, practice intellectual charity. When you encounter someone who disagrees with you, consider the possibility that they might know something you don't. This doesn't mean accepting every argument, but it means approaching disagreement with curiosity rather than certainty. Perhaps most importantly, consider the radical notion that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. In a world drowning in opinions, strategic silence can be profound. This doesn't mean never speaking up about things that matter to you, it means being more selective about when and how you contribute to conversations. It means recognizing that your voice doesn't need to be part of every discussion. The goal isn't to become intellectually paralyzed, but to become more intentional about when and how you engage. Quality over quantity. Depth over breadth. Thoughtfulness over speed. Understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't a one-time revelation that immunizes you against overconfidence. It's an ongoing practice of intellectual humility that requires constant vigilance. Every day brings new opportunities to overestimate your abilities, to speak beyond your knowledge, to mistake confidence for competence. The key is developing the metacognitive awareness to catch yourself in these moments and course correct. Life is indeed a continuous cycle of discovering how little you knew, how wrong you were, and how complex things really are, then discovering it again and again. This isn't a bug in human cognition, it's the price we pay for being learning creatures in an infinitely complex world. The alternative to this humbling cycle isn't wisdom, it's stagnation. The ultimate paradox of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that the more you learn about it, the more you realize how susceptible you still are to it. True wisdom might lie not in overcoming this bias, but in accepting it as part of the human condition. We are all walking contradictions, confident in some areas, appropriately humble in others, and often confused about which is which. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. Not certainty, but curiosity, not having all the answers, but asking better questions. In a world that often rewards the loudest voices, perhaps the most revolutionary act is admitting what you don't know. In a culture that celebrates expertise, perhaps the wisest position is recognizing the limits of your own knowledge. The Dunning-Kruger effect reveals something fundamental about human nature. We are all, in various ways, and to varying degrees, living beyond our intellectual means. The question isn't whether this applies to you, it's where and how it applies to you. And maybe, just maybe, that recognition is the beginning of true wisdom.